On December 13, 2020, Timothy Saunders ventured to a familiar home on Cemetery Hill Drive, the home of his daughter and son-in-law, Risa Saunders and Daniel Long. It has been several days since he had heard from them. Numerous calls had gone unanswered, and voicemails had never been responded to. As Timothy pulled into the driveway at 10:30 a.m., something seemed off. Even though the car was in the driveway and everything appeared to be in order, there was an eeriness that hung in the air, a sense of unsettling quiet that rang out from the house. As Timothy walked up to the front door, he knocked and attempted to turn the handle. Hearing the click of the latch releasing, the door was unlocked. As he cautiously walked inside the home, he would never be prepared for what he would experience on the other side of that door. Meanwhile, Nathan Grandy, a next-door neighbor who lived just 10 feet away from the home of Risa and Dan, was coming outside to walk his dog. A seemingly ordinary, crisp winter morning, Nathan was caught off guard by the appearance of Timothy Saunders in front of him, staring blankly. As Nathan offered a neighborly greeting, Timothy quickly asked if anyone had visited next door in the recent days. After replying no, Nathan was shocked to hear the words that left Timothy's mouth in reply. Nathan listened in horror as Timothy had explained that he had discovered his daughter and son-in-law lifeless in their bed. As Timothy continued, Nathan's blood ran cold as he heard Timothy explain that he had also discovered one of his grandchildren, Gage, lying on the floor in his parents' bedroom. After a moment of pure shock and horror, Nathan sprung into action as he hurried inside to call the police, as Timothy attempted to comprehend the horrific scene he had just witnessed. Risa Mae Saunders was a graduate of Herbert Hoover High School in Elkview, West Virginia. Risa was consistently described as kind, thoughtful, and energetic, a loving mother to her sons Gavin and Gage. Gavin was born in 2004 and was Risa's firstborn child, sharing in her mother's formative years as she grew and matured. Gage was born 4 short years later, acting as Gavin's first little brother and Risa's second child. Gage and Gavin both loved to play video games together, while Gage also enjoyed building things with Legos and spending time outdoors with activities such as swimming and archery, participating in the archery club as his elementary school. Gage loved to smile and help others, especially his mother when she made cookies. Risa loved to make cakes and cookies, always preparing dessert for special days and celebrations, and had a heart for making the best out of the toughest situations. In the early 2010s, Risa met Daniel Long, a graduate from Frankfort High School in 2002. After serving his time in the United States Army, Daniel became an employee of West Virginia Department of Corrections in Charleston, West Virginia as a correctional officer. Before finally deciding to get married in 2019, Risa and Daniel welcomed their son, Jameson, in 2017. Jameson, the youngest of the 3 boys, was by far the most energetic. He loved to sing and dance as well as build Lego creations with his older brother Gage. Despite the fact that Gavin and Gage were from different fathers than Dan, Risa and Dan had decided to come together and raise the 3 boys as their own in Fort Ashby, West Virginia. Fort Ashby, West Virginia is a town that sits in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains of the United States, featuring a quiet, charming area surrounded by natural beauty. While the quiet town is usually one of peace and beauty, the year 2020 proved to be a hardship for everyone, especially the comfy town of Fort Ashby. The town found itself grappling with the aftermath of devastating floods that wreaked havoc on its infrastructure and displaced many of its residents, inundating homes, businesses, and roads. As if the floods weren't enough, the global pandemic also held Fort Ashby in its grip. The once busy streets grew eerily quiet as businesses shut their doors and attempted to recover from the floods amidst social distancing and a town-wide shutdown. Although the year was coming to an end, the people of Fort Ashby were enduring great hardship, more than anyone could foresee. As police arrived at the scene of Cemetery Hill Drive, they prepared themselves for the worst as they recalled the words of the traumatized neighbor who had called 911 just minutes before. They knew that they would be entering into a home where horrifying violence had occurred, doing their best to piece the story together. As they entered the house, police saw exactly what had been described. Risa Saunders and Daniel Long, both lifeless in the bed they shared. On the floor at that foot of the bed was 12-year-old Gage, who had met the exact same fate as his mother and stepfather. After a quick examination, it was easy to determine that all three had been the victim of violence from a firearm, as they all shared wounds to their heads. Whoever had done this, they had been determined to inflict the certainty of each victim drawing their last breath. As police continued to survey the aftermath of a ruthless crime, they recalled the words that Timothy Saunders had said to them before they made their way into the house. Risa and Daniel had 3 sons. While they had, sadly, easily located Gage on the floor, police wondered where the other 2 boys, Gavin and Jameson, could be. Had they been kidnapped? Who was behind the vicious act? The only way that the police could gain this information was to continue searching the house for evidence. As they searched through the home, police noticed a few strange pieces of information that gave them pause. There were padlocks on some of the doors inside the house, as well as on the refrigerator. While this was strange, the task at hand was to locate the rest of the family who had lived in the home. This brought them into the shared bedroom of 16-year-old Gavin and 3-year-old Jameson, featuring both a bed and a crib. Once they entered the room, it was clear through the state of the bedroom that some kind of struggle or attack had also taken place in this room. Police continued to search for clues until one officer knelt down onto the floor for further inspection. It was at this moment that the officer saw little Jameson lying underneath his crib. After careful inspection, it was quickly determined that Jameson had also fallen victim to the hands of the mysterious assailant that had wreaked havoc on their home. Finishing a sweep of the entire place and finding a total of 5 shell casings, there was no sign of the oldest son, Gavin. 5 shells, 4 lifeless bodies, and 1 missing boy. Police were concerned that he could have been taken by whoever had attacked this poor family, and hatched a plan to locate him as fast as they could. It is a known fact among law enforcement that kidnapped children are of the highest importance, as their chances of being found alive dwindles greatly after 48 hours. They needed to work fast to find Gavin before it was too late. Before police started on their search for the final child of Risa and Daniel, they had the painstaking task of informing Timothy of their discovery, that he had lost a daughter, a son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren in a ruthless attack. As police searched far and wide for Gavin, they did their best to learn everything they could about him. There was something that set him apart from his family members. Some reason that Gavin wasn't left behind in the home on Cemetery Hill Drive, a reason why he was allowed to live. Investigators started digging into his history, hoping to find something that would lead them to Gavin. After speaking with family and friends and searching social media, Gavin's story became more clear. Gavin had been trapped inside his home, much like other kids his age, due to the severity of the pandemic that rampaged through the nation. His family had been super strict about his whereabouts in an attempt to keep him and the rest of his family safe, and school was no longer a daily activity. Gavin had spent all of his days alone in his room, fallen victim to the harshness of the pandemic and his family's rules. Of course, it was unavoidable that tensions would rise as the aftermath of the flood, coupled with the cabin fever of the nationwide lockdown, would turn Gavin's home into a boiling pot of tensions. As pressure continued to rise, Gavin began to experience and endure physical and verbal attacks from his stepfather, with his mother standing idly by as Gavin suffered. Additionally, Gavin had the responsibility of caring for his siblings, even at just 16 years old. His younger brother Jameson relied on Gavin for most of his needs, occasionally calling Gavin Daddy. In fact, Gavin had fled from home multiple times in the past, seeking help and sanctuary from the things that he had been enduring at home, but always came back empty-handed, forced back into the fold. Probably the most difficult part of being stuck at home day after day was the fact that Gavin had met someone just a few weeks before the nation's lockdown, someone that he could no longer see face to face. In the spring of 2020, Gavin met Rebecca Walker, a shy, introverted girl who he had seen around at his school. After finally meeting, the two instantly became close friends, exchanging messages back and forth on various social media platforms like Facebook and Google+. The two grew even closer as Rebecca shared the hardship that she had been going through with the loss of her mother just before their meeting, someone who she was extremely close with. To make matters worse, Rebecca was one of those who had been a harsh victim of the floods just months before, losing almost all of her belongings and leaving her with nothing to bring her peace and no one to turn to for comfort. As Rebecca leaned on Gavin for support through her struggles at home and mourning her mother's passing, the friendly pair grew into a loving relationship, characterized by infatuation. They both had endured so much pain and hardship, and the fragility of each of their mental states found comfort in the company of each other. There was someone for everyone, and they seemed to have found each other at the time they needed it most. Through everything that they had been through, they had been brought together. It was them against the world. As the two's relationship grew, tensions continued to run high as Gavin was forbidden from seeing Rebecca in person, leaving him only to experience her company through phone and computer screens. Rebecca wondered why Gavin's parents had forbidden him from seeing her, and why the only person in the world who she truly loved was taken away from her. Rebecca wanted desperately to help Gavin through his situation, and Gavin was a strong rock for Rebecca to lean on as her mental state became more and more fragile as the days went on. As police began to piece together the background images of what had happened, they started to think that Gavin could have simply run away before the attacks occurred. Either way, they needed to find Gavin, and find him fast. The next logical step was to find Rebecca Walker. Police arrived at the home of Rebecca Walker's grandmother on Riverhaven Road in Clendenin, West Virginia, another place that appeared eerily quiet. As police knocked on the door, they were met with the face of a quiet, introverted girl, Rebecca Walker. As a few officers stayed back to speak with Rebecca, a couple of other officers ventured inside the house, not entirely sure what they might find. It was a large house with multiple floors, and police secured every square inch. Not finding Rebecca's grandmother, officers climbed to the third floor to continue their investigation. Entering into all the rooms, police paused as they noticed that something was off. One of the dressers was pushed rather far away from the wall. Upon further inspection, officers discovered 16-year-old Gavin Smith crouching behind the dresser, fearful and alone. Relieved that they had found the boy safe and sound, officers did their best to ensure Gavin that he was safe, escorting him out of the house and outside to the patrol car. Police were more confused now than when they had begun their investigation, and it was time for them to figure out exactly what had truly happened just a day beforehand. Police did their best to make Gavin feel as comfortable as possible as he sat in the cold, isolating interview room at the police station. Gavin sat quietly, eating a burger that one of the officers had brought for him. As Gavin ate and waited, two officers entered the room, one with a similar bag of food in his hand, and the other with a bag of chips. The investigators sat down and ate together with Gavin, doing their best to relieve any tension that Gavin might have been feeling after the trauma of the past few days. Gavin was the sole survivor of a family-wide massacre, and detectives had to figure out why. It seemed that Gavin was unharmed, despite the fifth casing that was discovered at the crime scene, alongside Gavin's 4 family members. Had he been kidnapped? Ran away? What did Rebecca know? All of these questions swirled in the air as police began the interview. The police began by asking Gavin how he had arrived at his girlfriend's house, where Gavin explained that Rebecca's grandmother had been set to go out of town a few days beforehand. Gavin asked his mother if he could go spend a few days with Rebecca, helping her with her schoolwork and keeping the house in order while her grandmother was away, stressing the fact that Rebecca had been going through a hard time emotionally. His mother reluctantly agreed, and Gavin had been staying at Rebecca's house for the past few days. This confirmed officers' initial theory that Gavin had run away, since he had fled from home several times before this. However, something didn't seem right with the story that officers were given by the calm, collected Gavin who quietly munched on his food. Prior to Gavin's interview, officers had spoken with Gavin's girlfriend, Rebecca, and the story that she gave was vastly different than the words that were coming out of Gavin's mouth. This is when police told Gavin that they had spoken to Rebecca, asking Gavin to tell him what truly happened at his home. In response to this, Gavin changed his tune, seemingly unbothered by the abrupt provocation by investigators. It was at this point that Gavin began to detail the maltreatment that had been occurring in his home during the previous months. He spoke of a specific incident where he had been mistreating himself. When his mother noticed the wounds to his body, she told Gavin that he had been doing it for attention. When Dan, Gavin's stepfather, overheard this conversation, he began to punch Gavin to teach him a lesson. This event is what provoked Gavin to leave the home and flee to his girlfriend's house, without his parents' permission. Still, this wasn't enough for the investigators who were sitting face to face with Gavin, their hunch telling them that he still wasn't revealing the whole truth of what had occurred. Investigators reminded Gavin that they had spoken to his girlfriend already, saying that they knew more of the truth than he thought they did. The fact that they had spoken to Rebecca prior to this interview was just a small piece of the puzzle that police officers had received. When officers discovered Gavin behind the dresser on the 3rd floor of Rebecca's home, they discovered that his clothes and the nearby area was covered in the same red fluid littering the floors, walls, and paws of the family dog back at Cemetery Hill Drive, the home where Gavin's entire family met their demise. They encouraged him once again to tell the whole truth, ensuring him that they just wanted to know what happened and why, asking him to think back to that day. It was determined by crime scene investigators that Gavin's family had lost their lives a few days before they were discovered, leaving whoever was responsible a reasonable amount of time to develop an escape plan, and if not, an airtight alibi. This is when Gavin switched his story for a second time, providing even more detail about the terrible things that he had suffered at the hands of his stepfather. It was at this point where Gavin said to the investigators that his stepfather had attempted to take Gavin's life, chasing him with a sharp instrument multiple times over the recent months. If this wasn't bad enough, Gavin also detailed how his stepfather had held a gun to his head, attempting to force Gavin to perform intimate acts on him. Police, after hearing this story and gaining clarification, encouraged Gavin to reveal what he had done to respond to the horrific things he had endured. They waited in silence as Gavin pondered what to say next. At last, after what seemed like an endless period of silence, Gavin finally revealed that he had accidentally used the firearm against his mother and stepfather. Contributing his actions to him being out of his mind, he explained how he snuck into his parents' bedroom while they were asleep, carefully removing his stepfather's firearm from his dresser drawer. Gavin's parents had no idea what was about to occur, as 2 loud bangs rang out inside the house. As Gavin continued to tell his story, he explained how he took the lives of his 2 younger brothers out of necessity. According to him, Gavin's youngest brother Jameson had awoken from the loud noises that boomed from the bedroom, yelling and screaming in fear. Gavin continued on to say that Gage had entered the room, explaining how he had attacked Jameson with a sharp implement in an attempt to silence Jameson's cries. This is when Gavin turned his weapon onto Gage, taking his life in retaliation for attacking his youngest brother, the one he loved most in the world. After entering his own and Jameson's room to assess the damage to his little brother, Gavin had determined that he was beyond saving, pulling the trigger on Jameson to put him out of his misery. Gavin explained that after the passing of Jameson, he came out of his mental haze and realized what he had done. Then he thought that he should take his own life to end his own misery at what he had done, but had thought about the fact that Rebecca needed him, and he couldn't leave her to face the world alone. While this story was terrifying, heartbreaking, and unsettling all at once, Police were still skeptical of Gavin's explanation of events. As Gavin had relayed his tale, he got confused multiple times, seeming to crumble under the probing questions of the investigators. He apologized for getting confused, changing his story over and over again to try and fit the narrative that the investigators wanted. Investigators stopped Gavin again, bluntly telling him that this story, while more truthful than the last, still held gaps. Police were unafraid to let Gavin know that they didn't buy this story either, saying that the story that Gavin had fed them about the passing of his brothers just wasn't adding up. Gavin apologized, said he had gotten confused, and began his story again. After Gavin had used the firearm on his parents in the bed, waking his younger brother Jameson as his wails rang out from Gavin's bedroom, Gavin left the room to calm Jameson down and get him a drink, returning him to his bed to go back to sleep. Returning to his parents' bedroom, Gavin was alarmed to find 12-year-old Gage standing at the foot of his parents' bed, staring in terror at the carnage that was left behind. It was at this point that Gavin used the firearm on Gage in a split second, ending his life, pulling the trigger whilst aimed at the back of the head. Following this event, Gavin then ventured into the bedroom of his little brother Jameson, who was hiding under his own bed. Gavin ended his life as well, reminiscing on the fact that he was forced to take care of Jameson from the day he was born. Gavin closed his story by saying that if his stepfather and mother had not put him through pain and suffering, none of this would have occurred. Police listened silently to the final true story that Gavin told, trying to stomach the utter pain and horror that they felt inside. They did their best to continue asking Gavin questions to build a case against the apparently ruthless attacker that sat before them. Gavin explained that he had planned the attack on his family a few days in advance, telling his girlfriend, Rebecca, what he was going to do. Following his attack, Gavin immediately told Rebecca what he had done, fleeing the home on his bike and into the woods. After this, Gavin made his way to Rebecca's house to hide from the investigation that was sure to begin any day. Police took down some more evidence, such as the names of his brother's biological fathers and the specific circumstances of the crime, concluding their interview by arresting Gavin Smith. However, this was not the end of the investigation, as Gavin had just revealed that his girlfriend Rebecca knew exactly what was going to occur that fateful day and did everything she could to help cover it up. Gavin had just inadvertently implicated the one person in the world that he wanted to protect. Police swiftly returned to Rebecca's house to arrest her as well for involvement in the case of Gavin Smith. As they both awaited trial, police continued to try and piece together the twisted relationship between Gavin and Rebecca. Investigators were alarmed to find that there were 15,000 pages of messages between the two, discussing the trauma that they were both enduring and bonding over their rage at the fact that they were forbidden from seeing one another. Police became more and more unsettled as they realized that Rebecca had wanted this attack to happen just as much, if not more, than Gavin did. Investigators continued to comb through messages, quickly finding that the relationship between Gavin and Rebecca was a perfect storm of obsession, delusions, and sinister plotting. It was clear from Gavin and Rebecca's conversation that Gavin was angry that he and Rebecca could not be together, and they both wanted a way out of the self-described prisons that they had lived in. Gavin's plan to take the lives of his entire family was hatched for one simple reason: to be with Rebecca without the intrusion of his family. As police discerned Rebecca wanted Gavin to commit this crime, they charged her as a juvenile with first-degree homicide. Rebecca Walker was the first to walk through the process of receiving justice for what had happened to Gavin's family. Although police wanted to charge her with the same crimes as Gavin due to the horrifying encouragement and comfort that she gave to him amidst his attack on his family, 6 months later she was moved to be tried as an adult for her crimes. During this trial, Risa and Daniel's family heard for the first time that Rebecca had known what Gavin was going to do a month before the attack occurred, giving her ample opportunity to stop it. It was during this proceeding that Rebecca was charged with being an accessory to homicide, pleading guilty, and agreeing to serve 10 years. The first would be served in a juvenile detention center, and once she turned 18, her sentence would be reconsidered. It was the belief of her legal representation that she had been greatly manipulated by Gavin, her fragile, emotionally unstable clinging onto a future with Gavin for dear life. After Rebecca turned 18, she returned to the courtroom for the judge to reconsider her case. Despite her tearful letter that was read by the judge to Risa and Daniel's families, the judge upheld her sentence, moving her to an adult prison to endure the remaining years. Gavin's trial also began in juvenile court as he faced 4 charges of homicide against his family. However, Gavin's case was also moved to adult court, as investigators believed that the nature of his crimes allowed him to be tried as an adult. By the time Gavin saw his first day of trial, he was 18 years old, an adult facing the crimes of his childhood. Despite admitting to the horrifying acts that he committed, Gavin pled not guilty to his charges by reason of insanity, quoting his dazed mental state as the source of blame for the things that had occurred. However, no one was prepared for the shocking discovery that would be revealed by Rebecca during his trial. The now 19-year-old Rebecca Walker was called to the stand as a witness for the prosecution. She revealed new information about the day of the attack that had never been heard before. Rebecca revealed that she had been on video chat with Gavin as he wreaked havoc inside his home, telling him to hurry up and finish the job. Rebecca stated that the screen went black as she heard the first 2 bangs ring out inside the room of Gavin's parents, and waited for a few minutes before she heard the 3rd loud pop ring out as Gage fell to the floor. Gavin returned to their video call, but shortly after heard the familiar cries of his little brother Jameson. The screen went black a second time as the 4th bang of the firearm rattled through the house, sealing the fate of Gavin's final family member. Walker continued to explain that Gavin decided to commit the crimes because he was angry that his parents wouldn't allow him to be with Rebecca. The prosecuting attorney then asked Rebecca the question that everyone had been wondering over the course of the trial. "Did you want Gavin to end the lives of his family?" Rebecca replied, "Unfortunately, yes, I did." All Rebecca and Gavin wanted was the opportunity to be together, against all odds. To them, this was the only possible way to do it. Rebecca's testimony shocked the courtroom as they listened in horror to the fact that Rebecca had heard every second of the pure evil that Gavin had committed against his family, encouraging him to finish the deed. This was the testimony that would seal Gavin's fate, reducing the reasoning for his crime to a simple anger at his parents' rules. Gavin Smith was found guilty on all charges, which included 3 counts of first-degree homicide and 1 count of second-degree homicide, with the jury deciding that Gavin's offense against Gage was not premeditated. Gavin was also charged with the unlawful use of a firearm during the event. During his sentencing hearing in January of 2023, the court heard a monotoned, emotionless Gavin Smith say that he was sorry for his crimes, and he regretted what he did in a weirdly relaxed tone. This only added to the eeriness of the situation, with onlookers feeling more unsettled than reassured by this statement. The judge held the same sentiments, sentencing Gavin Smith to 3 life sentences for 3 charges of first-degree homicide, with the opportunity for parole after 15 years. The judge quoted Gavin's crimes as pure evil, saying that the only reason that Gavin was receiving any kind of leniency was because the law required it. Since Gavin was a minor during the time of the attack, he must receive parole eligibility as part of his sentencing. Gavin was also sentenced to 40 years in adult prison for the second-degree homicide against his younger brother. Because of the law that spared at least some of his life, Gavin Smith will be eligible for parole in 2038.